and welcome to my long overdue review of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom that I have been taking forever to make. Uh, but this is mostly due to me actually trying to play the game to see all that it has to offer, or most of what it has to offer, instead of just rushing through the story and pushing a review out. So after that, how about I just get into it with the story. Let's get the story out of the way as spoiler free as possible to start. So after the events of Breath of the Wild, the entire kingdom of Hyrule is still recovering from after the calamity. And while exploring the depths of Hyrule Castle, Link and Zelda discover runes from the Zonai, an ancient race that nobody knows about that was hinted at in Breath of the Wild. Oh, and they also find the mummified remains of a sealed Ganondorf, also known as the Demon King. Yeah, when your main villain, the game's main villain, is known as the Demon King, you know it's going to be fun to talk about as a Christian. So the seal that was holding Ganondorf is broken, and turns out he's still, extremely powerful. And in one attack, he destroys the Master Sword and Link's entire right arm. He also causes extreme tremors while raising Hyrule Castle into the sky, an event that will be known as the Upheaval. During the tremors, Zelda falls and vanishes in a flash of light, while the arm that sealed Ganondorf just grabs Link's hand and pulls him into the sky. And upon waking up, Link is greeted by Rauru, a Zonai, and the first king of this version of Hyrule. I know timelines are messy. It also turns out it was his arm that was sealing Ganondorf and has now replaced Link's injured arm. And now Link sets out on a journey to find Zelda and defeat Ganondorf while searching for the Master Sword after it disappears. And now for the spoilers, so, skip to this timestamp to avoid those. So much like Breath of the Wild, Link is tasked by Purah with inspecting some phenomena caused by the upheaval in each region, except instead of Impa, it's Purah this time. Purah, I don't know how to pronounce words. As well as, searching for Zelda at the same time. Upon reaching every region, he teams up with one of the local leaders to stop the troubles they're facing, such as extreme winds and whatnot. He teams up with one of the local leaders, and after defeating the dungeon boss, each person learns they're a descendant of a sage from the imprisoning war back when Rauru was alive, and that Zelda told them to prepare to help Link in the future. Yeah, Zelda got teleported to the past, people. That's the flash of light she disappeared into. And also, like Breath of the Wild, there are memories for you to find. Except here they are Dragon Tears, like the title of the game. So at least that makes sense, unlike Breath of the Wild. Like the title of the game works into the story instead of Breath of the Wild just being like a random, mostly random title. Each tier shows you the events of the past, all the way from Zelda first arriving, to Ganondorf attempting to attack Hyrule with Moldugas, to Ganondorf's birth as the Demon King, and finally to the Master Sword being sent to the past, and Zelda turning herself into the Light Dragon to charge up the sword's battery. I know it's insane, but this is the actual story of the game. And I guess that's about it for the story, though, that I'll talk about. Just have to say that this actually feels way more like a Zelda story than Breath of the Wild ever did. I loved getting to spend time with characters that are alive and have an impact on the world, and I felt actual emotions in the scenes more than Breath of the Wild as well. Like the ending cutscene, it actually got me in the feels a bit. The lip syncing in most cutscenes is stinks, to be fair, but I can look past that for the most part. This game also had better voice acting overall. Like again, I just said the lip syncing isn't great, but the voice acting itself is pretty nice. One small complaint I have is the story is repeated so many times by so many different characters. It's just I already heard all of this from the memories. I don't need to hear you, the random researcher, explain it again. All right, let's move on to the gameplay then. The game uses the same engine and the same overworld, mostly the same overworld as Breath of the Wild. So much of the gameplay is relatively similar in many regards. The overworld experienced a few changes through the upheaval, but has remained mostly the same, with the biggest change being the addition of caves. Now, the Sky Islands in the depths, that was a big addition to the game. The Sky Islands are a smaller, very pretty small, so getting to them is the challenge, not actually exploring the Sky Islands. The depths are like an entire subterranean area underground that is like the size of the actual overworld map. They're extremely dark, and a lot of the area looks very similar, making traversal pretty tedious and slow with little to no change in the environment as you run around, with very similar looking landmarks as you run past. The biggest draw to the depths, though, is the uncorrupted weapons you can find and special clothing items you can find, which were amiibo items from Breath of the Wild. And there's also a couple original items in there, but still, that's a really cool plus. Like, they knew what they were doing there. One major change to gameplay was the removal of most of the normal weapons, but just, like I just said, you can find those in the depths. But it's a little annoying having mostly ruined weapons for the entire time. And this was done in an attempt to making the player want to use the new fuse mechanic to make weapons have higher damage and more durability. This fixed some problems and added some more problems along with it. Main problem is it's not a way to repair tools constantly, and it got rid of tools. Thankfully, however, there is a way to constantly repair certain weapons. They just don't outright tell you. And there are a few analogs of certain tools, the Cobble Smasher, and that's the only hammer that returned. No axes came back. You just have to keep making hammers and axes whenever you need them. My overall thoughts on fusing is that it's a pretty mid-ranged, like, it's not good, it's not bad. It's just there. You have to deal with it. Mostly, it just added an extra step to using weapons. Next up is the Ultra Hand and Zonai devices. Using the Ultra Hand, you can manipulate objects in the environment, much like Magnesis in Breath of the Wild, but not just metal objects, any physics object that can be moved. And you can build things by fusing objects together. And through the use of Zonai devices, you can build vehicles, which can be useful, but you just don't warrant the amount of time they take to build or how long you're able to use some of them. Like the flying machines, they don't last long enough to actually be useful most of the time. Now, people have already broken flying machines into a very specific science, and now all you need is 2 fans to traverse the land of Hyrule without wasting too much battery power. So that's great. We already have super flying machines that answer all these questions. And one thing that is nice about Zonai devices is they can be fused to weapons and objects for some convenience. Mainly, the shield rocket combo that launches you straight up really fast. Like, you just fuse a rocket to your shield, boom, you shot up, and you don't have to. It's basically a replacement for Rivali's Gale from Breath of the Wild. One problem I have with the Ultra Hand is objects don't maintain their momentum when you're moving them. But honestly, this is more of a nitpick on my part. Let's see. Many new clothing and food items with effects to deal with common complaints, mainly slipping in rain, were added. So, like, that's great. New food items that make you not slip in the rain. It's a good change. It's a good addition. Combat didn't really change all that much, however, and if you know how to fight in Breath of the Wild, you'll have an extremely easy time playing this game. Some small changes to combat are a couple enemies gained a new attack or two, Guardians and the Sheikah technology robots are gone, and bullet time got a small change that actually might make it better overall. But overall, combat can still mostly just be, flurry rushing and just dealing tons of damage that way, or bullet time. The biggest change is most weapons have some sort of unique attribute now. The Zora weapons deal more damage when you're wet. Rito weapons blow wind. Gerudo weapons have a 2 times multiplier on fused weapons. And the Gorons have the Cobble Crusher. That's literally like the only Goron weapon there is. Some other effects were added too. Soldiers' weapons have better charging abilities, so like they waste less stamina or they charge faster. Knights' weapons deal more damage when you're on low health. Royal weapons have better flurry rushes, making them objectively some of the best weapons ever. And the Royal Guard's weapons deal more damage right before breaking. And people also started abusing that feature too, making an unbreakable super weapon. One other interesting addition, however, is the new version of Champion's abilities, now called a Sage's Vow. They not only give Link a new ability he can use, but also an avatar of the corresponding Sage to fight in battle. The abilities range from in usefulness quite a bit, with the Rito and Gorons getting the best ones, and everyone else is really situational. So the Rito got the best one objectively. Tulin will blow Link in a straight line while gliding, giving some much needed horizontal movement to gliding that wasn't there before. The Gorons got the second best one with Yunobo, rolling into an exploding flame ball you can shoot on the ground or on any vehicle, which is a nice little bonus they added. Like when you're riding a vehicle, he'll pop on and act like a cannon. The Zora got a weaker version of Daruk's protection, with Sidon making a ball of water around Link that protects you from one hit. And if you attack, it will be shot like a little beam projectile. Not too useful. It also has the added bonus of cooling Link off in hot places, which is also very situational. You usually have better armor that makes this completely useless. And the Gerudo got an off-brand version of their old ability. So Riju charges up and lets Link shoot a lightning bolt wherever his arrow lands. A little less. Now, the best thing about these abilities is they don't have like a bulk. Oh, you got 3 uses, now you have to wait 5 minutes for it to recharge. No, you can just like, boom, all right, 10 seconds have passed, all right, I can use it again. And then finally, the Zona I give you. This is one I actually won't spoil it. It's not too useful, but it's like a lot of fun. It's fun. It's fun first, useful last. One thing that is a little iffy to me about the gameplay of this game is they brought back shrines. But here I think they handled them pretty well, actually. Like, when I first heard, oh, they brought shrines back, Breath of the Wild really, yeah, they cut way back on the combat shrines that plagued Breath of the Wild, those tests of strength. And any combat shrines they do have are like actual fun mini puzzle challenges, and they're completely self-contained. Like, they remove all your weapons and gear from you, and you're supposed to just figure it out with the tools they give you, instead of, oh, I can just spam all my weapons now. My biggest gripe with shrines, and this applies to both games still, is they made most side quests lose their major rewards of like a heart piece, or, and because of the way cooking works, a bottle. Like, doing that one side quest in an older Zelda game is more memorable than doing a shrine that looks exactly like the other 100 plus shrines that look exactly the same. Like, oh, I helped that woman with her chickens, I got a heart piece, is a lot more memorable than, oh, I did a small little puzzle room that looks like the other 100 puzzle rooms, I got a light orb. I think that covers my thoughts for the most part on the gameplay. Let's move on to the music. The music, okay. The game shares some similarities with Breath of the Wild in the music department, with most of the soundtrack, while playing the game, being ambient noise, and what can only be called a minimalist soundtrack. Like, it's just 1 or 2 instruments that play some random notes every once in a while. And then, every once in a while, they'll sneak an old song into the background, so like a nice little Easter egg, such as when you're riding a horse, which is a nice arrangement. Same one is from Breath of the Wild, and the same problem arises from Breath of the Wild, where it doesn't last long enough because you leave your horse every 5 seconds. And then when you visit a stable or a fairy fountain, old songs play. The major towns have their own theme, with Rito Village, Zora's Domain, and Goron City, almost remaking the original version of the theme for that village. And again, these were just pulled from Breath of the Wild, but they're such good songs I had to mention them again. Okay, now the boss battles and story cutscenes. Those are what's really good in the music department. The blank and the blank boss battle themes are so good. Like, I will talk about the one that is actually amazing later in a spoiler-y section. Now for cutscenes, they kind of fall into this trap where they just keep reusing the same 3 good songs over and over again. Like, they're good songs, but they just reuse the same same ones. The number of times they use Zelda's Lullaby and the main theme of the series is like just too much. Reuse music from other parts of the series a couple times, why don't you? Like, the number of times we hear Zelda's Lullaby and the main theme of The Legend of Zelda in these cutscenes. Like, we get it. Zelda is on screen at this moment in time. Oh, and this actually reminds me. The main theme for this game is pretty middling compared to the other main themes of the series past. I will always compare every main theme to my favorite ones being the Twilight Princess and Spirit Tracks main themes. Those two have always captured some of the best narrative use and cohesion by establishing them as an important song. Like, Twilight Princess, that song plays in the most important cutscenes and has the best arrangement. Spirit Tracks is actually woven into the gameplay. Tears of the Kingdom, it just sort of plays. It plays it during the opening of the game when you're skydiving, and a small jingle when you pass the time at a campfire or go to sleep. From what I can recall, it's not really used in any of the cutscenes and loses that sense of importance. Like, I'd probably forget this game's main theme very quickly if I stopped playing the game for less than a week. But overall, the soundtrack itself is good. It's just not my type of soundtrack for this style of game. Well, let's talk about the art style, which there may be a few spoilers in here, so, just skip ahead. I'll tell you when to skip ahead, actually, yeah. This game, again, uses a lot of the same stuff from Breath of the Wild, but this time they incorporate a lot of the Zonai art into this game instead of Sheikah art. Breath of the Wild suffered from too much ancient Sheikah tech being everywhere, but I don't see that problem here happening with the Zonai. It actually feels like they took what happened in Breath of the Wild to heart and decided to tone it back a bit. The dungeons don't all have the same theme anymore, so unlike the Divine Beast, these are all very unique in design. This is where you may want to skip ahead. Like, the Wind Temple is a flying boat. The Fire Temple is an abandoned city mine under a volcano. Out of all the dungeons, the only weak one is the Water Temple in terms of looks. And the Spirit Temple too, but it barely counts as a dungeon. But seriously, all of it is amazing and great to look at. And this is also sort of a spoilery part right here, talking about design. I just wanted to take this small moment to talk about my favorite game design moment in this entire game. And this is definitely maybe a spoiler for the Wind Temple. And we're tying back into that boss, so skip here if you need to. Leading up to the skyship, you are hopping on trampoline sails and breaking ice, which you can break in one hit if you land from high up enough or build enough momentum from diving. Then the boss Colgera, when attacking, reveals its weak spots, which look very ice-like. So it turns out that if you dive headfirst into its weak spot, you can break through and never use a single weapon on this boss. And the path to the dungeon teaches you all of this. The boss itself is not super hard, or even hard at all, but I will remember this moment more than any of the blights from Breath of the Wild. Like, the fight itself, the design of the boss, the lead up to it, the music, it all culminates into basically the equivalent of a gaming core memory for me. And I'm sure a lot of Zelda fans would agree in that regard. All right, and this is a interesting segment I've decided to add. My thoughts as a Christian. Some people might take issue with the fact that the villain's title is the Demon King, but I look at it as something that is good in a way. It's a way to represent an absolute evil. And it is your job in this story to defeat the absolute evil. The only place I can see people maybe actually having some issues is the mention of gods and the three goddesses that created this world. Well, personally, I'm not too bothered by this things like this because it's a fantasy setting and it can have any backstory it needs, any backstory it wants. If we didn't have fantasy, life would be extremely boring. And this game series, my favorite game in the series, says that a race of weird humanoid, sort of, not even humanoid, chicken people with human heads are the closest descendants to the gods of their world. Like, how can I not think that's hilarious? The the Aku from Twilight Princess, it's just like they're pathetic, yet they're the closest relatives to the current gods. You can't tell me that's not funny. All right, and then just in conclusion, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was way better than anticipated for being a Breath of the Wild sequel. And I mean way better because I didn't care for Breath of the Wild as a Zelda game. As a normal game, it was pretty good. As a Zelda game, it was stinky. And this game was actually able to feel like a Zelda game in the story and the dungeons. The overworld and side quests, still not a ton, but anything is better than staying purely as Breath of the Wild. The new building and fusing mechanics may not be amazing in casual use, but they still brought some fun along with them. They made breaking the game a lot more interesting, to be certain. Alright, and then without further ado, I give The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom an 8 out of 10. A great game and a great series moving back to the right direction after a game that did a little too much to breathe new life into the series. And with that, this has been another Marcus Talks game review. And I'd just like to ask you to like and comment if you enjoyed this. I'd really love to hear your favorite Zelda game or what you've done in Tears of the Kingdom so far. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.